A single missile launches. On radar, it's just a dot, a bright speck moving fast across a dark screen. Operators in a control room lock onto it immediately. They've trained for this. They know the trajectory patterns. They know the speed ranges. They know what to do. At first it looks routine. Then something changes. That one dot splits. Not physically, but on the screen. 1 becomes 5. 5 becomes 15. Then dozens. 40 separate objects, all moving at hypersonic speed, all following believable ballistic paths, all heading toward the same defended region. Now the room feels different. Radar screens are cluttered. Warning tones stack on top of each other. Software begins classifying targets. Interceptors are queued. But here's the problem. Every single object looks real, not similar, identical. Same radar cross-section, same speed, same heat signature, same descent pattern, and the clock is ticking. At Mach 10, a re-entry vehicle is covering miles every second. That means decision time isn't measured in minutes, it's measured in heartbeats. The operators face a brutal question. Which one do you shoot? If you guess wrong, the real warhead gets through. If you shoot them all, you may empty your defenses in a single engagement. And that's the core fear here. Not speed, not explosive power, not even advanced maneuvering. Confusion. Because modern missile defense systems aren't just built to shoot things down. They're built to identify the right thing to shoot down. They rely on discrimination, separating the real threat from noise. But what if the noise is the weapon? What if the attack isn't designed to overpower your shield technologically, but to overwhelm it mathematically? What if the goal isn't to beat your interceptors, but to force you to fire so many that you simply run out? The United States has spent more than $300 billion building one of the most advanced missile defense networks in history. It's layered, redundant, and battle-tested. But that system was built around certain assumptions. And if those assumptions are wrong, even slightly, then the shield doesn't have to be destroyed. It just has to be exhausted. To understand why that possibility is so unsettling, we first need to understand how this shield is supposed to work in the first place. To understand why this new threat is so serious, we need to understand how missile defense is designed to work when everything goes according to plan. The system built by the United States Department of Defense follows what's called a layered defense architecture. Think of it like multiple safety nets stacked on top of each other. If one misses, the next one catches the threat. Redundancy equals security. Here's how those layers break down. At the top layer, you have THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. Despite the name terminal, THAAD engages missiles high in the atmosphere, sometimes just as they begin re-entry. It's designed to hit targets moving several miles per second using pure kinetic force. No explosive warhead, just a direct collision. A bullet hitting a bullet. Below that is Patriot PAC-3. This is the system most people recognize. It handles the last line of defense, intercepting incoming missiles closer to their intended target. If something slips past the higher layer, Patriot is there to clean it up. And working alongside these systems, especially in cooperation with Israel, is Arrow 3. This interceptor operates even higher, outside the atmosphere. It attempts to destroy ballistic missiles in space before they re-enter at all. That's the ideal scenario. Eliminate the threat as early as possible. So on paper, this is incredibly impressive. A missile launches. It's tracked by satellites and radar. An interceptor is assigned. If that fails, another layer takes the shot. If that fails, yet another layer engages. It's like facing 3 goalkeepers instead of 1. Against a traditional ballistic missile, 1 rocket, 1 warhead, this architecture works. The system identifies the incoming object, calculates its trajectory, and launches interceptors with high probability of kill. But here's the quiet assumption underneath all of it. The system assumes it can tell which object is the real warhead. Everything depends on discrimination, the ability of radar and infrared sensors to separate real threats from debris, fragments, or decoys. If the radar sees 3 objects and one looks different, that's manageable. Algorithms classify them. Operators prioritize. Interceptors are allocated efficiently. But what happens if there is no difference? What happens if every object looks equally lethal? The entire layered architecture is built on the idea that you can identify the right target to shoot. Without that, your layers don't give you clarity. They give you a decision crisis. And that's where the story takes a turn. Because recently, a missile appeared that seems designed specifically to attack that assumption. Recently, Iran released footage of one of its newest ballistic missiles, the Khorramshahr-4. At first glance, it looks like many other medium-range ballistic missiles. Large, liquid-fueled, capable of traveling roughly 2,000 kilometers. Powerful enough to carry a heavy payload. But the real story isn't the missile itself, it's what it releases. Instead of carrying a single re-entry vehicle, one warhead riding back through the atmosphere, the Khorramshahr-4 appears to carry a dispenser bus. Think of it like a delivery platform. When the missile reaches the right phase of flight, that bus opens, and out come dozens of objects. Not debris, not random fragments, engineered decoys. Each one shaped and coded to mimic the radar cross-section of a real warhead. Each one designed to reflect radar waves in the same way. Each one built to produce a similar infrared signature as it heats up during descent. On radar, they don't look like fakes. They look like threats. And here's where it gets more sophisticated. The release appears timed during the re-entry phase, when the missile is plunging back into the atmosphere at hypersonic speed. At that moment, the vehicle is surrounded by a plasma sheath, superheated, ionized gas created by friction with the air. That plasma interferes with radar signals. It blurs clarity. Now imagine what defenders see. Instead of one clean track, they suddenly see 40 objects emerging inside a turbulent, radar-distorting environment. All moving at Mach 10 or faster, all descending toward defended territory. 40 identical objects at Mach 10. That's not just a tracking problem. That's a decision nightmare. Because missile defense software doesn't have unlimited time. It has seconds to classify, prioritize, and assign interceptors. Algorithms are trained on patterns, differences in motion, heat, size. But if the decoys are convincing enough, those differences disappear. The system can't confidently label one as fake and one as real. And when you're not sure, you assume they're all real. This is where the shift happens. This isn't just a new missile with more range or more explosive power. It's a missile designed to attack the logic of the defense system itself, not by outrunning it, not by overpowering it, but by forcing it into an impossible choice. And once you understand that, the next question isn't about radar performance. It's about math. Now we get to the part that really changes the picture. Let's talk about cost. A single Patriot PAC-3 interceptor costs several $1,000,000 per shot. Estimates often land around $4 million. A THAAD interceptor, even more, often reported above $10 million each. And these aren't sitting on a supermarket shelf. They take time to build. Complex components, precision manufacturing, limited production lines. Replacing them can take months. Now compare that to a decoy. A hollow, radar-reflective cone made of lightweight metal or composite materials. No guidance system, no propulsion, no high-end electronics, just enough engineering to look real on radar and infrared. It doesn't need to survive forever. It just needs to survive long enough to force a decision. That's where the imbalance appears. If a missile releases 40 credible objects and defenders decide to fire 2 interceptors per target, which is common doctrine to increase probability of kill, that's 80 interceptors. 80 for one missile. Now imagine 10 missiles in a coordinated salvo. That's 800 interceptors potentially launched in a matter of minutes. 800 rounds that may have taken months or even years to manufacture. Gone in a single engagement window. This is what analysts call magazine exhaustion. In military terms, your magazine is your stockpile, the number of rounds you have ready to fire. Once it's empty, even the most advanced system becomes irrelevant. It's like having the world's best fire department, but only enough water for the first few houses. The strategy here isn't necessarily to guarantee penetration on the first shot. It's to drain the defender, to force them into a spending and production race they can't sustain under repeated attacks. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Defense is almost always more expensive than offense. It costs far more to intercept a missile than to build a decoy that triggers an interception. So the contest shifts. It's no longer interceptor versus warhead. It's manufacturing capacity versus manufacturing capacity. And when you start looking at it that way, you realize this isn't just a tactical trick. It's a long-term strategy. And it didn't appear overnight. What we're seeing now didn't suddenly appear in a laboratory last year. Programs that separate multiple objects from a single missile have been discussed in Iran for over a decade. Early announcements described systems capable of releasing several payloads from one booster. At the time, many outside analysts dismissed those claims as exaggeration, but separating multiple objects in mid-flight isn't simple propaganda. It's a real engineering challenge. Think about what's happening physically. A missile traveling several kilometers per second is under extreme stress. When it releases payloads, those objects must separate cleanly without colliding. They must stabilize almost instantly. They must survive intense vibration, rotation, and heat. If separation timing is off by milliseconds, the objects can smash into each other. If mass distribution isn't precise, flight paths become unpredictable. If heat shielding isn't calibrated, components burn up. That requires testing, iteration, refinement. You don't get that right by accident. Over time, what looked like theoretical claims began to show more technical maturity. Footage improved. Separation events appeared more controlled. The number of released objects increased. That progression matters. In military development, there's a big difference between a one-time experiment and repeatable operational capability. Early systems prove you can do something. Mature systems prove you can do it reliably under real conditions. The recent display of the Khorramshahr 4 suggests a move beyond experimentation. The dispenser bus looks deliberate. The release timing looks calculated. The objects appear coordinated rather than chaotic. That signals investment and intent. When a country consistently improves a capability over years, it usually means that capability fits into a broader strategy. This isn't about spectacle. It's about reshaping how opponents think about interception. And if decoys are the current step, the next step could be something even more complex. Right now, we're talking about decoys. Decoys confuse. They force defenders to guess. They clutter radar. They drain interceptors. But there's a step beyond confusion. That step is MIRVs, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. Here's the difference in simple terms. A decoy is fake. It exists to make you waste a shot. A MIRV is real. It exists to multiply the damage. With MIRV capability, a single missile doesn't just release objects that look threatening. It releases multiple actual warheads. And after separation, each warhead can adjust its path slightly and aim for a different target. One missile, several cities. To visualize it, imagine a delivery truck that splits into 5 smaller vehicles, mid-air, each steering toward a different address. That's a major leap in complexity. Each re-entry vehicle needs its own guidance system, its own heat shielding, its own targeting data. The separation timing must be precise, and the targeting must remain accurate at hypersonic speed. There have been reports suggesting that Iran is working toward more advanced multi-warhead systems. At the same time, newer missile families have been described as capable of maneuvering during flight, adding unpredictability to the equation. To be clear, confirmed operational MIRV capability has not been publicly demonstrated. But trajectories in military development matter. When you see steady progress in payload mass, separation technology, and re-entry survivability, it suggests a direction of travel. And if decoys already strain discrimination systems, real multiple warheads would strain them even more. Not just by multiplying radar tracks, but by multiplying genuine lethal threats. That changes the strategic equation, because now the defender isn't just deciding which object is real. They may have to assume that several of them are. And that brings us to the bigger realization, the one that shifts this entire discussion away from individual missiles and towards something much larger. For decades, the dominant belief in missile defense was simple. If our technology is advanced enough, we win. Faster interceptors, better radar, smarter algorithms, more precise tracking. The assumption was that innovation would always stay ahead of the threat. But what if the contest isn't primarily about technological superiority anymore? What if it's about math? Let's strip it down. An attacker builds one missile. That missile carries decoys, maybe eventually multiple warheads. The cost per added decoy is relatively low compared to the cost of building the original missile. The defender, on the other hand, must respond to every credible object. If 40 objects appear, they can't ignore 39 of them and hope for the best. They must treat each one as lethal until proven otherwise. That means more interceptors, more launches, more depletion. The battlefield shifts from performance to production. It becomes a question of output. How many interceptors can you manufacture per month? How fast can you resupply forward batteries? How deep is your stockpile? In this model, it's not missile versus interceptor. It's factory versus factory, budget versus budget, decoy production versus interceptor production. And historically, offense often holds the advantage in cost imposition strategies. It's usually cheaper to add complexity to an attack than it is to defend against every possible variation of it. This doesn't mean missile defense is useless. It means its success may depend less on individual interception probabilities and more on sustained capacity over time. The uncomfortable truth is this. Even a 90% interception rate sounds impressive until you're facing hundreds of incoming objects over multiple waves. Volume changes everything, and once you see the contest through that lens, the most important question isn't whether the shield works. It's how long it can keep working. That's where the conversation becomes deeply strategic and deeply uncomfortable. This isn't just about one missile test or one country's footage. This question is sitting quietly in defense ministries in Washington, in Jerusalem, in Gulf capitals where batteries of Patriot PAC-3 systems stand ready on desert launch pads. The question is no longer, can we intercept this missile? It's, how many can we intercept before our magazines are empty? That's a very different kind of problem. Because missile defense has always been presented as a shield, something solid, something dependable, a technological umbrella that protects cities, bases, and populations. But shields in modern warfare aren't infinite. They're inventories, they're supply chains, they're production timelines. If saturation tactics become the norm, waves of missiles, each deploying dozens of credible objects, then even highly advanced systems could face strain. Not because they fail technically, but because they are forced to respond at scale, and scale is expensive. The future of missile warfare may not be defined by a single breakthrough weapon. It may be defined by exhaustion, by who runs out first. The shield doesn't necessarily need to be penetrated to lose credibility. It just needs to be depleted. And that's the strategic tension now shaping the next generation of military planning. So here's the real debate. Can missile defense adapt fast enough? Can production expand? Can new discrimination technologies filter real threats from decoys more efficiently? Or has offense, through cost, volume, and saturation, gained a structural advantage? This isn't a question with an easy answer, but it's one that will shape how nations invest billions of dollars over the next decade. If you want to keep breaking down the strategies, technologies, and economic forces shaping modern warfare, make sure you're subscribed. Because the future of defense isn't just about who builds the fastest missile. It's about who understands the math behind it.